Hi, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be a video response to one of my users' comments. I just wanted to respond to a very long comment, and I was like trying to write through it, and it was just so long. I just wanted to address it properly. And this video is in response to a user's comment, so I just wanted to give him proper feedback and also give more insight into UBI. There's a lot of confusion about UBI, and if his comment didn't get clarified on my last video, which I'll link below, you can check out my other video on UBI. This will be my attempt to address any of those small concerns that are left. But he had a huge amount of comments, so I figured, hey, let's answer those comments and really address some more of the UBI confusion. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get to it. So I'm just going to read to you the comment. So taxation part is a big misleading. So what he's talking about, he's asking about the UBI and how taxation would work in order to raise the money for UBI. And I'll read further. What I've argued all along is that the taxation graph in reality is a bell curve. People at the very bottom group, which I define as people under welfare threshold, and the people at the very top, which I define as people whose income earned from wages, definitely do not pay as much as the middle, which I define as everyone else. This middle group includes you from 40K a year teacher to a 500,000 per year cancer doctors, okay? Now, basically, it just goes on to explain how these people pay far most taxes because they have no tax loopholes to exploit and do not get compensated for welfare, do not have influence in the stock markets. They are gambling when they invest. And this is where you are wrong when you combine the top 20 or the top 30 into a single bucket. The people at the very top are very different from us. They pay little tax, and I think it's shown even in the conservative graphs. Overall, than the people far below them, right below them. People that earn wages or pay full tax on it. Now, there is some truth to that that those at the very top don't necessarily pay as high a percentage of their taxes, because there are loopholes that you can do as a business owner. I know these. A lot of the times what you do is you defer some of the money that you're earning into your company, where you basically use your company as a tax shelter. But even with that, even with all the ways that they try to get around the system, and shelters overseas and all that kind of stuff, the top 20% of tax, of people's income, top earners, I should say, the top 20% pay 86% of all the U.S. taxes. So even though that group, is the more privileged group, well, they pay a majority of the taxes for the U.S. And the ones at the very, very top, sure, they pay percentage-wise, they try to reduce their tax burden, but they're only doing that because, once you earn where you're paying millions and millions of dollars of taxes, you have to protect the money that you're earning, because a lot of that money is, needed to maintain your business, to maintain all these things. And when you're dealing with those big numbers, you have a good accountant. It's just the way it is. So good accountants can really exploit the system. That's why a simplified tax system would be better for everyone. I'm very fond of the idea of a flat rate tax, because this progressive tax system is really unfair. For the most part, it punishes those who actually contribute the most to society. So That's my opinion on that. But another thing that he makes a mistake about is the concept that these people that are at the very top are just, living on like like gambling money. It doesn't quite work that way. A lot of the top people, like the top 0.001% people, are really business owners. They're the Amazons of the Jeff Bezos of the world and the Bill Gates of the world, and a lot of them do contribute a lot to the U.S. in general. They hire lots of people. They pay taxes as employee taxes a lot. They provide a lot of revenue for the government. So to say that they are, just playing with their money and gambling it, that's not really true. Even when they invest their money, that money is being used as an investment. It's money that's helping businesses grow, and it's funding all this development that happens in the U.S. So I just didn't like that characterization. But what does this have to do with UBI? Well, the point is this: those people that will never benefit from a UBI are the ones that are paying for it the most, and that's somewhat unfair. The ones that pay the least amount of taxes, which is the other 80% of the U.S. population, well, they can basically vote for whatever they want. And because they're getting the most benefit from it, they'll generally vote for other people to pay for it. So basically what happens is, with UBI or anything like welfare, where, people can vote to expand the government's power, well, people will generally vote yes for that because they're benefiting from it. And it's the top 20% that are being burdened with actually having to pay for it, which is really unfair. So that's my opinion on that. The next thing he was talking about was the cost of welfare versus the UBI cost. And welfare has a massive administration. I agree with that. UBI is theoretical. It theoretically should be far more efficient. I agree with that. It's debatable how much. I think you are dismissing it is very subjectively. I think you're dismissing it very subjectively. Additionally, you don't talk about using VAT to capture or the missing tax money. I've mentioned Amazon is able to escape taxes, and that is something even conservatives are saying is not right. So there should be no argument here whether Amazon should have to pay taxes. Okay, so then again, this is one of those things where it's, again, very misleading. Okay, so first of all, the cost of welfare is horrible. It's one of those things where there's a huge administration, and that huge administration has a gigantic cost, and for all that administration, there's very little that's produced. A lot of the money gets wasted just because of bureaucracy. But money does get to people, but generally it has to go through so many hoops that it's not a very efficient way of getting money to people. Now, UBI would sweep away all that administration, in theory. The problem is, if you know anything about governments, it's really hard to get rid of administration. You say, hey, we're going to create something new. Well, that's something new. It doesn't mean that you get rid of the old in most governments. It's really hard to get rid of administrations. That being said, let's say UBI got rid of all that, somehow magically got rid of all those administrations. Well, you still have a problem where there's what's called government creep, where administrations gradually expand because they always do. They always find ways to build their administrations to get more people like administrating it. It's just one of those things. So probably over time, UBI would just be as bad as the old welfare system. That's kind of the life of having governments administer things, because they're horrible they're very good at creating administrations, but they're not very good at actually getting things done. So that's my issue. Uh, Other thing that I have to really comment on is this whole Amazon should have paid taxes. This is one of those myths that's been pushed on the left, that Amazon didn't pay taxes and it doesn't pay taxes. Well, that's not true. What happened is there's taxes that Amazon does pay. They pay a huge amount of employee tax, and as an employer, you have to pay a percentage of the employee's tax. Also, the employees themselves pay tax to the government, and they pay other taxes within state taxes, local taxes, and they generate revenue as well. That there's taxes generated there. But what happens is, as a corporation, it's only on your profit that you actually pay taxes. So if you are expanding your business, there might be a period where you use your profits to really just build your business, to build new warehousing, to build new offices, whatever it is. And that means that year, maybe you just don't declare a profit. You're not profitable. Now, you can't do that every year. Generally, companies are profitable on occasion, and they have to be in order to maintain the shareholders. So what ends up happening is you have good years and bad years. So what happens is, yes, maybe they didn't pay any corporate tax one year, but that's not the norm. That doesn't always happen. So the point is, it was one year where Amazon declared that they didn't have to pay corporate taxes, but that does not mean that they didn't pay taxes. And that doesn't mean that they won't pay taxes in the future or have never ever paid taxes. It's just one of those myths that was was used as propaganda against these big companies. It's just not true. Okay, so his fourth argument. Okay, his fourth point. Your argument that government is not efficient is not a valid point. I'm not sure about that. Um, for there to be a real change, there's literally no other institution that can do this job. Well, that's really not true. Before big government got involved with the welfare system, there was many institutions that were doing it, and those institutions still exist. A lot of people were getting not welfare, but help through either church organizations or community organizations. And they were very efficient because those organizations were local and they would know who needed the help and they would be able to help those people directly. A lot of those organizations relied on volunteers, so they didn't have the huge costs where as a government you have like to hire those people to do the work. Well, within like these private organizations, you get a lot of people volunteering to help, and you can be very successful at administrating very big things. Like look at the Red Cross, look at like there's lots of aid organizations that do a really good job of helping people when they need help. So to say that only the government can do it, that's just ridiculous. You talk about the invisible hand, but it doesn't apply here. The invisible hand only applies to certain areas of the economy where the private sector can do. Public necessities cannot possibly be done by the private sector. Again, I would disagree. Similar argument before. How do you expect the FDA, I'm not a big fan of the FDA, FDA to be replaced by the private sector? How do you expect the military to be replaced by the private sector? How can the police be privatized? You talk about how bad government is, but don't recognize the foundation of the society is built on a governed world. Back to UBI. Who else is there to implement it? Honestly, I find it ironic that you dislike the government so much, yet you said you built businesses. Do you think businesses could have been built without the government? Let's say you were in a business of selling products. How would you sell them if your trucks had nowhere to go? Again, no one is proposing for bigger government. No one is arguing that we want a government to control all aspects of life. There's always an equilibrium point or so-called sweet spot in all things of life. Okay, a lot to unpack there. These, as I said, this was a really long comment. I just trying to unpack it. So, okay, so I kind of addressed the first part, which is really the efficiency of government. What I was trying to say in my previous video about the invisible hand is the invisible hand is a kind of a really amazing concept that a lot of people don't really get. And one of the things with the invisible hand is that there's this invisible hand that can guide the market. And the way it works is this. Let's say there's a demand for cupcakes and a whole bunch of people want cupcakes. Well, what'll happen is the current supply of cupcakes will be demanded and that price of cupcakes will go up because there's just so many people that want cupcakes, and the people that are selling cupcakes can demand, a higher price for those cupcakes. Now, if there's a shortage of cupcakes, well, the price can really skyrocket. And then what happens is, okay, so where was I? Oh, wow. Phone rings and then you get lost. Okay, so I was talking about cupcakes. So with the invisible hand, basically the cupcakes can go up and down in value, down in price based on the demand. Simple supply and demand kind of thing. But what happens, the cool part about the invisible hand is that you don't have to go say, well, okay, we need more cupcakes to the market, or we need less cupcakes, or we need more producers, or we need more clients. Like under a controlled or centrally planned system, the government basically says, okay, let's make 1,000 cupcakes because there's this huge demand for cupcakes. Now, what can happen overnight, people will be like, I'm sick of cupcakes. It can really just happen like that. All of a sudden, nobody wants cupcakes and the market dies. And then if you're a government planned solution, you basically create all these cupcakes that nobody wants. Well, in a free market system, what they do is they reduce the price. They do things to market the cupcakes. So that's, and there's no system that needs to be figured out to do that. It just happens because, things can kind of, reassess the situation on the fly. And that happens with welfare as well. So as I was talking about, like community organizations, when they have a need, the need isn't constant. So governments are very good at constant. So when government plans something, they say, okay, the budget for welfare for XYZ city or town or whatever it is X dollars. And but if you think about it, well, it could be the situation like if you're in a small community, what happens is somebody gets laid off of work and the community says, okay, hey, let's rally around and help this person. And they give them some food, they give them whatever it is to get him on his feet again. And that's a free market solution because the demand is sudden and the solution for it is as sudden as, as the demand is there, the need for it. So with the government thing, it's a flat amount that just comes in and there is no flexibility. There's no, and it could vary. It could be like $1,000 is needed one year and 20,000 is needed next year, and then another year it could be zero. The government doesn't work and have that flexibility. It's very good at setting budgets, and it doesn't understand those local micro economies that or demands. So the central planning, it just doesn't work. There's no computer that can figure it out. There's no government politician that can figure it out. And I always liked that about the invisible hand, that it can figure these things out without all that administrative cost. So never disregard the invisible hand's power and its elegance, even when you think, oh, only the government can do it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Now, I do agree with some of the other points that he made, that the government should be there for the military, and those things are more set budgets. Like, a military, you can say, okay, well, we need this much protection. And that can vary, but it's not going to vary much over year to year. If there's a war, well, then you wrap it up. But for the most part, it's pretty steady. Police is the same way. Those things can be administered by the government because they are pretty static in terms of the need for them, for those services. So I do believe in free market solutions whenever possible. And I do emphasize that, hey, I would like a free market maybe solution to the police and other agencies, but there's only so much the free market can do in terms of that, where you do need the larger budget that a government can kind of pool in to do some of those things. I personally am a big free market advocate, but hey, I have understanding that there is some need for government. However, welfare might not be one of those things that the government can do well. And that's really the point that I'm trying to make. It was one of those things where really when the welfare system was created in the first place, it didn't actually solve the problem. Governments have a tendency of being very good at maintaining a problem. So if there's a problem with welfare, like people needing help and support, well, the governments are very good at maintaining that group of people that need help and support. It's the weirdest thing. So you don't want to have that. You really want to get people off welfare as quickly as possible. I know there are cases where people can, they can't get off the welfare. They do need it because, either medical or whatever circumstances that face them make it very hard for them to actually be independent. But for the most part, that isn't the case. I've seen some pretty amazing videos of people with one arm, one leg, and they're like lifting bricks and doing stuff. They're working, they're keeping active, even though they might be physically, less able. They still, find ways to work and provide for their families. So, I always believe in letting people try to find solutions on their own. And, I don't like the government being like some kind of nanny state where they're just taking care of us and making us dependent on them. I kind of want people to be more independent and free. So that's a little bit of my subjective attitude towards it. So, okay, so I'll agree with him on there's an equilibrium, sure. So number 5, how is welfare group lobbying against UBI a valid argument? For any change to happen, whether you are opposing or reducing or increasing welfare, someone will protest. What's your point? How do we get it done in this world? Even reducing any government agency will cause some uproar. Heck, changing nothing causes an uproar. So this happens with or without UBI and cannot be used as an argument. Well, it is an argument because it's different. This is a government situation where the government is the one that's going to be uproaring. The government's very bad at cutting itself. Like, it's sort of like, the government doesn't want to cut agencies within itself. It's very bad at doing that. And so the uproar is internal. It's very, very hard for you to cut those agencies out. And, people outside of the government might be like, hey, let's get rid of those things. But because it's part of the government, it's very, very difficult to do it because they'll create, ways of blocking any change. The thing is, it's the government itself that's making the decision. And that makes it even more challenging because it's not us, the individuals, who are saying, hey, let's get rid of the welfare system. It's the government that has to make that decision and implement it. And so it's very, very difficult. But even with all that said, like as I said, I even said this in my previous video, if you had a magic wand and you could wave away the current welfare system and replace it with UBI, I still think UBI sucks. So I really think it would be impossible to remove it. And that in itself is an argument because there could be a cost associated to just overhauling the system. And it's amazing how parasitic these institutions are within government, and they will try to find their way back in, even though they get cut out. So I'm not a big fan of government change, and I don't believe that it can happen. Is my point. So yeah, but it is a valid argument because you have to understand how governments work. If you don't understand how governments work, then you can't really implement something without that understanding and how to get past those organizations and those institutions within government that basically can prevent you from implementing whatever solution you have. So you really need to understand government, and it's not a valid thing to say that that this isn't a problem that you have to look at. Okay, so fairness. So fairness, well, nothing is fair to everyone. What policy proposal has ever been there that everyone universally agrees on? Even lying is acceptable these days, according to Trump supporters. Okay, that's a little bit of political bias there. In fact, you can bring this up about the poverty rate. You're right. It's an arbitrary number. Guess what? So is fairness. I don't like fairness personally. I'm not advocating fairness ever. Your concept of fairness and everyone else are different. UBI is fair in the eyes of many, including conservatives. I'm not really sure what the argument is here. I'm not a big proponent of fairness because I think when you think of fairness, it's really equality of outcome. And I don't believe in that. I'm not a big proponent of equality. And I don't believe I actually believe life isn't unfair. And there's advantages to having life not being fair because it can be a motivation to change one's circumstances. So I don't see fairness as being an issue. And I don't think UBI is any solution to solving the inequalities of life. I just see it as being a situation where money is being taken from one group and given to another group, and then creating a welfare, like a underclass of people that are sheerly dependent on the government money. That's what I really hate about it. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of this whole concept of fairness. Okay, so next one, point 7. Free money makes people lazy argument. Okay, so this is really what I was getting at just a moment ago. This has not been proven. While I see your viewpoint, you already know that we share a similar view on welfare trap problem. But I don't think you understand UBI. Your entire speech on UBI making people lazy is identical to how you describe welfare. In other words, you are assuming that they are the same. There is no evidence in any research or experiment done. Now, there have been attempts at applying UBI in different areas, but they were always short-lived experiments, usually around 8 months. I haven't heard of any even lasting a year. The problem, and the one that people always cite is Alaska. Alaska is not truly a UBI. They give like a small amount of money, a very small, I mean less than $1,000 a year per person. It's less than that per year. So it's not a true UBI. It's not like they could survive on that money. So the point is, it's a very small amount of money, and it's not a true UBI. And there's no real proof on a long-term thing where people have been on a UBI system and how that would impact their productivity. I do believe, based on my own personal experience, living in a welfare area, that I have seen the damage that subsistence living can really create, where people depend on the government and have this attitude that the government should be taking care of them, and what that does to their mentality and to their attitudes to generating money. And it's just so bad that I wouldn't want to see that being spread across the country or the world. So I'm very against UBI for that reason. UBI, the problem is people are very good at adapting to very bad situations. I even see it with this COVID-19 thing, where people are like, "Give me my money," and they're just like expecting the government to pay them to be at home and doing nothing. Uh, and I really see that, like, we're forced in this case to do that, and it's one of those things where people are saying, "Well, why should we even go back to work? Why doesn't the government just take care of us for the rest of existence?" And there's actually politicians that are advocating that, like where like AOC advocated that people shouldn't go back to work. I mean, it's like so insane. Now, that's how these kind of systems become sort of integrated into one's mindset, where if the government's just giving you money, why bother working? You know, and that it seems like, oh, people will want to work just for the sake of working, and I do believe people do that, but people will find ways of avoiding work when they don't have to, and you can actually you can discourage that natural tendency of wanting to find fulfillment through work, through these kind of systems. Like naturally, people do want to work, and people do find fulfillment. And part of the reason why you see like high levels of depression and problems within welfare recipients is because of the fact that they aren't working, but they still don't work. They still choose not to work because they are trapped in the welfare system, and they don't want to lose the comforts that they do have. So UBI kind of gets away from the welfare trap, and I do understand that. I want to make that clear, that I understand that the UBI thing is something, since it's always there for everyone, that and it doesn't change just because you're working or not working, that that gets you away from the welfare trap, where you don't have to worry that, oh, now that I'm working, I'm going to lose my check. I get that, and there is some validity there, but the problem with it is still there will be a percentage of people who will see UBI as a job, and they will not do anything more than just collect their check from UBI, and that's what I'm worried about. And I want to discourage any percentage of the population from doing that. There will always be lazy people, and what you have to do is you want to make your society as productive as possible. And the way you do that is you make it so that people have to work. You have no choice. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps kind of situation, where you force people to work. If you see really, really poor societies, like the kind of like the Indias and the South Asian countries, where it's just really, really poor. And Africa is another good example, like very poor. And I'm not trying to belittle them. Actually, I respect them in a way, because they are poor. They don't say, "Oh, government, can you help us?" They don't do that. They try to find a solution. They find ways of making money so that they can survive, and they will do what it takes to survive. So there's a lot there that's commendable about it. I don't want people to stay in those kind of situations. I don't want people to live like that. But that attitude of willing to work and willing to kind of survive and try to find ways to survive is very admirable. And we should encourage that. We have all the tools, we have all the things that make our society great, but we've lost sight of the value of work. And we got to really bring that back. So I see UBI as a step away from that integrity of work and integrity of, contributing. And I really want that to be something that's brought back and encouraged within our society. So that's my issue with the laziness argument. Wow, there's still lots more in these. Okay, so number 8, UBI won't solve all problems. No one ever said it would. You can't. We know the problem with homeless is not that there is no help for them. Many of them have mental issues and literally cannot live normally, at least not until they get better. How do you ever solve that? How do you ever deal with these people who won't work no matter what you try? And I agree. There will always be people that will fall out of the system, that either through mental issues or just sheer laziness, that they're useless. They're the the people that are useless. Well, I'm a little bit Darwinism on this, where survival of the fittest. If people don't contribute, sorry, you sink or swim, and that's harsh. But if you discourage that kind of thing, they don't breed, they disappear, and you get a much more productive society. So I know it's kind of harsh, and maybe I'm too brutal, but I think sometimes you got to let people sink or swim. And the problem is we're helping people to swim when they're forcing everyone else to drown. We're basically helping these people that are really shouldn't be in our society. We're helping them at the cost of the ones that are contributing the most, and that to me is a real crime. I always like the idea of bringing people up to a standard and rather than bringing people down to a standard, if that makes sense. And that's there's going to be a situation where people will get left out, people will not meet the standard, but that's life. I mean, you can't you can't rescue everyone. You got to realize that. And you got to sort of make that cost analysis where hey, maybe some people get left out. But that's why I actually like the idea of communities supporting other people. If people really feel like, oh, I really want to help these people, they can. If they really feel like those people deserve to be helped, then they can. That's the free market solution. Instead of government solution, which is forcing everybody to support people who might not be useful. Why should we be forced to support them? Now, in the free market solution, those people can get support because they can rely on community groups who feel empathy for them to help them out. So I like the free choice, the free market solution of if people feel like they're worthy of getting help, then they can get that help, instead of the government one where we're forced to help them even if we don't want to. Okay, so that's my opinion on that one. Wealth redistribution. Okay, what do you think is happening today? It goes in all directions. When the government subsidizes an industry, they are shifting wealth from the rest of the industries to that specific industry too. I agree. I totally agree with this. This is a very good point. I really don't like when governments help business. I don't like that. I'm against crony capitalism because this is the kind of thing that really kills business. The government is choosing winners, and I hate that. I'm against it. So people attach too much stigma to redistribution. I actually still attach a lot of stigma to redistribution. I don't think it's good that the government helps industry. I don't want the government to help industry. I think the industries should be able to survive on their own. If they can't survive on their own, then they're not worthy of being in existence. Okay, so I'm very against communism style of redistribution. But when you look at UBI, you notice since every person gets the same amount, it is not really a redistribution in the sense you put it. You are making it sound like some people get it and others don't. That's not what happens here. Funny thing is, Alaska has had this dividend for the longest time, and it's very much a Republican state. Again, Alaska is not a good example because again, it's just too small. It's not the numbers that we see with UBI. It's not the 1,000 per month or 2,000 per month, depending on who's promoting the idea of UBI. It's more like that per year. It's like a very small amount that they're getting. Redistribution of wealth, I'm very against in terms of the government having that as a responsibility. I don't like the idea of equality of outcome, that we try to force, society to normalize everyone to, it's just, it's theft. If you take money from one person to give it to another person, it's a theft. It's basic. So I'm very against that. Now, when the redistribution happens in, like, building bridges or building roads or providing education, I can sort of agree with that. So I'm not against all government. I do believe it has some roles. I would like to see a lot of those roles be taken over by private, but it is what it is. The point is, I don't like the idea of redistributing money, because all you're doing is you're basically stealing from one to give to the other. That's really my basic argument, and I just see that as morally not defensible. Okay, so welfare didn't reduce poverty rate. I agree. That's my whole point. They say this is a misconception, and I agree. I think it is a misconception. Welfare didn't help reduce poverty rate. It actually remained the same. As you already know, you have the same view about the welfare trap and why it's bad, but you're focusing on the wrong thing. Your theory is that welfare doesn't reduce poverty rate. Well, it isn't intended to. When someone who actually needs help is getting help, it is essentially increasing that person's income. This isn't isn't in poverty, since he's not in poverty, since you factor in those benefits. But the statistics will never tell you that, because on the book, his income is still at poverty level. Okay, and those are all reasonable points. That is why the welfare trap is dangerous, because the people that are above the threshold are actually the poorest in society. That's true again. My biggest argument against welfare is that by boosting the poorest people on paper, you actually mistreating the other lower income groups, just like minimum wage. When you increase the burger flippers' hourly rate to $15 an hour, who is going to pay the people who is going to pay the people that were earning $15 an hour because of their skills? Again, all points I agree with. I'm against the minimum wage. I think it's unfair that there is a minimum wage. I agree about, actually, all of this I totally agree with. This is just the problems with the welfare state. It's just a really bad idea. And this is why I'm against UBI again, because of, we know how bad governments are at addressing poverty and trying to be the ones to control the economy in terms of wealth and wealth redistribution. We know governments are bad at that. Why would you want them to be more involved with it, where they basically are now giving it to everybody? It could be just even worse. There's no, poverty isn't created just because of money. And this is a big misconception about poverty in general. that they think it's a economic thing, that if you just throw money at it, that will solve the problem. Give people $1,000 a month. Wow, problem solved. No more poor people. It doesn't work that way. Poverty is actually more of a mental state that people just don't even try to get better or do something different. And it could, and it can be also from a whole bunch of different reasons. The point is, it isn't something that you can just solve by waving a magic wand with a dollar bill attached to it. It's something that is, it's just part of life, that there'll always be a group of people who will not fit into society, and they will always be either poor or have problems with finances. And there's always going to be people on both ends where they're going up and down. Like, poverty, it's not a stagnant thing. It's always the same people that are always going to be poor. That is not what I'm meaning. But there will always be a percentage of people who have problems with being poor, just, for whatever reason. And they shift. They sometimes can be wealthiest people. They can be the poorest people. People have good days and bad days. But my point is, if you're trying to solve that, it's like solving something which is not a real problem. It's sort of like unemployment. Unemployment is one of those misconceptions that people have. There's actually a thing where if you said, hey, I don't want anyone to be unemployed, okay? But that's actually not a reasonable way to run a society. So generally unemployment rates around 6, and on a bad day, it's around 10%, okay, depending on the market. So 6%. And the reason you have that 6% is people can be in between jobs. They could be, improving their job prospects. They could be training. They could be doing things that are preparing them to find the job that is ideal for their skill set. And so what ends up happening is you have them not working because they're not that they're not being productive, but they're looking for an opportunity to really find a job that suits their skill set. And as a result, there will always be these people that are in transition. So, and also because of the sheer nature of economics and how the free market works, where businesses will do well and do bad, and there will always be a change in the demand for employees. So you'll have that kind of transitional employee kind of going between jobs. So that you want that flexibility, because you want to have that pool of people that you can pull from when you need that talent. Okay, and if they're always locked up and having work, they will, then it'll be very hard to grow your business, because you won't have any pool to pull from in order to build your business. And the same happens with poverty, that there will always be sort of this transit group that, good days and bad days, where they will be in transition. So assuming that you can't solve it because it's not a problem in the first place. It doesn't even, it's one of those things that it happens. But if you're seeing it as an issue, it really isn't. The problems are when people like really are, have some physical or mental issue that they can't overcome, and that makes them poor, and that they're living a very horrible life. And those cases are very unique, and you have to address them in a very unique way. That's why I always believe in community support, because those are the people that know them the best. And they're the ones that can probably provide the services and the essential things that they need. So again, trying to wipe out poverty is like trying to wipe out the idea of unemployment. It's something that doesn't make sense. There'll always be that transition. Okay, so next one is Number 11. So he's got like a whole bunch of points here. Your idea about strong communities is nonsense. Well, okay. It's not even a real policy. It's just your imagination is just like the communist utopia. Asian governments have plenty of assistance programs. Okay. You are just cherry picking from what you like from other countries. Look at Japan, who most would agree is one of the strongest economy. They have universal healthcare and all kinds of social programs. Actually, when I clicked this link, it said that Japan doesn't spend that much on social assistance as a portion of their economy. So it's actually his own argument kind of fails. Um, Strong communities. I don't know why he doesn't get this. Maybe because he's younger or he doesn't understand what a strong community is. Believe it or not, even when I was living in that kind of really horrible welfare state, the people were not bad. I really didn't see the people as bad. There was a lot of community support for people within that society. And what they would do is they would have like bake sales. They would raise money for somebody that needed help. Like one of my friends, his house burned down, and the whole community gathered to try to help them because the insurance money didn't cover the cost of the house. There was a lot of issues where basically that person was going to be screwed. They had no house. So the community rallied and raised some money for them. And if you look at things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all these things that are community organizations where they rally for people and help them out. And so this is not a fantasy. This is not some imaginary thing. There's lots of nonprofit organizations that go out and help the people, and they are driven by the communities. And so, yeah, it's not something that's imagination. The problem is what's happened is those community groups that used to be very, very powerful and strong in terms of what they could do have really been weakened by the shift in that responsibility to government, where the government has been the one that has been given that responsibility to try to take care of everyone. And I see that as a really sad thing because these organizations knew the people better. It was local money that was being used to help local people. So I'm not really, I don't really agree with any of this. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense. There is, you know, my argument was very sound. Number 12, you continually link welfare to UBI, which is flat out wrong. The U stands for universal, where welfare always means tested. You seriously cannot escape the far right flawed ideas about universal programs, about switching perspective and look at UBI as a public road. Everyone is free to use it, whether you have $1 or $1 billion. A public funded, but everyone has the equal right to use. It is a big difference that you casually ignore. Actually, the thing that I don't like about universal basic income is the fact that it is universal. So one of and this is why I'm against equality. I'm totally against equality. If you watch any of my videos, I'm very against equality because basically what you're doing is you're saying everybody in society is the same. Treat everybody the same. Give them all this $1,000. Okay? That's the idea of universal basic income. You give everybody this money. And that is a one-size-fits-all solution. This is somehow magically going to fix all the problems in the world because you give everybody the money that they need to survive. However, people are not all the same. And what you're doing is you're using a sledgehammer when you need to use like a very small, fine toothpick to fix the problem, or fine instrument to use to fix the problem. You're using a very big tool to fix a very small problem. And that's not the way you go about it. Like you really, when you're dealing with governments, you really have to figure out what's the best bang for your buck and allocate money accordingly. Spreading money across in a big blanket is not necessarily the best ways of allocating money and resources. So that's the issue I have with universal basic income, is the fact that it is universal, where it's not so focused on the direct people that need it. That's why I'm very pro community organizations and nonprofit organizations helping people, because it is a surgical approach to solving the problem. It's helping those that need the help rather than just spreading money all over the place. So that's my issue with universal basic income, is the fact that it's universal. Anytime something is universal, you know it's going to be screwed up. It's like I live in Canada. Universal healthcare is horrible. It means everyone gets equal access to really bad healthcare, and it's horrible. Whereas what you want to have is, independent healthcare, where everybody can find the healthcare thing that they need that fits their needs. So yeah, I'm very against universal. So he missed my point about that. And I don't see myself as far right, as if like I'm some extremist person. But yeah, we'll think about that one. Okay, so children, number 13, children. You know children are better than anyone else. You know your children better than anyone else. This is the same argument as anti-vaxxer, anti-vax vaccine people use. Do we really need to go down this path? And this is like a straw man argument. So my point with my children in my previous video was that I know my children best. So I know how to allocate resources to my children to protect them and to help them, get what they need in order to basically be better off in society. So I have this sort of philosophy. What you want in society is free market, and at the home, you want socialism. What I mean by that is that in the home, you protect your children, you give them all the things that they need to grow, okay? And then what you want to do is you want to bring them away from socialism into the free market system. So you basically, you help them out when they're young and when they're babies, and you get them to a point where they're moving away from that socialistic uh, like childhood to being mature people where they can live in a free market. So my point with the children argument is that I, as a parent, know how to best raise my children. And maybe I make mistakes, but those mistakes, that's part of life, that we have to allow parents to make mistakes. And I actually agree with anti-vaxxers in the respect that they have the right to choose whether or not their children get vaccinated. I think everyone should get vaccinated, but I don't believe it's the government's decision to determine whether or not my children get vaccinated, or, I don't believe in that government mandate that everyone has to get vaccinated. I do believe in liberty. I believe that we should have freedom. And yeah, so, and it's a horrible group to support. Actually, really against the whole anti-vax movement, because it's stupid in many levels. But I'm actually for them in the respect that there is an element of liberty that has to be maintained, and we don't want the government deciding everything for us. So that's kind of a weird one. But with UBI, it's the same idea, that I don't really want the government being the one that decides everything for us. I want freedom for people. And I think we're best capable of deciding what we need for ourselves and having the government decide that. Okay, so that's number 13. Number 14, the solution. At the end, you're saying you offer a solution. No, you did not. You offered your concept of what people should do in society. This is not a real solution, but one example would be schools need to have dedicated classes to teach this. Saying what you think is right is not policy, period. Well, I actually believe that I did provide a solution. And he complains about me further by saying that all my viewpoints are based on my experience. And I agree with that. I'm educated on a lot of this stuff, but also it comes from my personal experience that I had a very bad experience with welfare states and government, very strong government states. Um, but I did offer a solution. And the solution I provide is this. It's a very simple solution. Get government out of welfare. Give more money, like allow people to maintain more of their money, tax them less. And what ends up happening is when people have more money, and there's actually studies that show this. I'd have to look up the literature, but there are studies that show that when people have more money and have that more disposable income, they can actually, or they're more generous with that money, that they actually help more people as a result. Um, so generally what ends up happening is if people can maintain more of their money, they're more likely to support charities, they're more likely to support organizations within their community, and they're more closely going to help each other. Um, and so that's my point with all of this, that what I want is to take things away from the government. So it's not that we're depending on the government for a solution. We're depending on ourselves for the solution. And when we are taxed heavily and we don't have the flexibility to be generous, well, then it really ties our hands and prevents us from being generous and from helping our fellow man, you know. And I'm really for helping other people. Actually, I donate a lot of my time and I do support charities. I actually give money to certain charities. I actually support people overseas as well, where I give them money. My point is like, but I can only do that because I have some disposable income to do that with. If the government takes my money and then it decides how that money is being used, well, then I don't have that flexibility. So my solution is very simple. Don't depend on the government for a solution. Depend on yourself for the solution. And that might not seem like a policy or something like that, but maybe the policy is to remove the policy. Like that could be a policy in itself. Get the government out of welfare and get the government out of trying to be the one that solves the poverty issue. I don't think they're very good at it. And that's my solution is get the government out of it. Because I think people can do it on their own. They're individuals and they have ideas on how to help people. And people are caring. We are compassionate creatures. We do care about our fellow man. So we do try to help each other. So let's let people help them. You know, don't tie them down by taxing them to death so that they can't possibly help each other. So yeah, those are my solutions. Let's, it's if you're sort of in this government mindset where the government's the only one that can provide the solution, maybe then it doesn't sound like a policy. But if you're in the sort of a free market, free will kind of person, like believe in freedom and libertarian ideas, then you probably see my solutions as being very valid, and not being a policy necessarily, but being a real solution for the problems of poverty. So I hope I've addressed all of these things. I'm not sure if the person that I addressed all these responses will actually appreciate or understand my points or think that they're even valid arguments. But I wanted to at least express some more understanding about why UBI is not needed and why it's not even a good policy. So I hope this has been enlightening and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please check out my other videos. Check out my previous video on UBI. And I get into more details in there as well. So hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.